think, got the recording going. So Alex Burke is our speaker tonight, and he is well known to most of you. He is our assistant director, has been for 5 years. We have been very blessed to have his talents and ideas and thoughts and expertise at the museum. He's a Glenver graduate, also Roanoke College. He was a history major, and he puts that to work all the time. But we are very grateful to have him. He is even sticking with us. He's gone back to graduate school. So he had a final exam last night, and here he is, ready to give a talk. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
Okie dokie. Awesome. Can everybody see this?
Yep.
I can see it.
Perfect. Well, everybody, I will preface this with saying that this is the first talk I ever gave for the Salem Museum Historical Society. So this is arguably probably one of the 2 or 3 that is most requested that I give, that people ask me to talk about. And today I'm here to take a few moments to talk with everyone about the history and the preservation of the Preston Place, which is believed to be Salem's oldest home. I have a pretty unique connection to the property that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But in order for us to start and talk about the Preston Place and its significance, we need to go way, 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 way back in time, all the way to who, if you've ever heard me speak before, someone who I call is Salem's first celebrity. And that is, come on slides, Brigadier General Andrew Lewis. Andrew Lewis is, as many people know, the Revolutionary War hero living in Salem. And his estate of Richfield covers over 600 acres of what will become downtown Salem. And this map, this little bluish section, is part of Andrew Lewis's Richfield plantation, covering most of downtown region all the way through to where the Civic Center is. It covers up the heart of downtown Salem, is what I'll call it. But as many people know, Andrew Lewis passed away in 1781, and his estate was over 600 acres. I personally absolutely hate mowing my yard. I couldn't imagine if I had to take care of 600 acres like that in the blink of an eye. So Andrew Lewis passed this estate down to his family. So after that, they started selling off different tracts of land to different individuals. And in the year 1800, Andrew Lewis's son sold a tract of land to a man by the name of James Simpson. And he sold a small little tract of land right here at the heart along the Great Road. And Simpson's plan was really, really simple. He's noticing more and more people traveling down basically what I'm going to call the pioneer version of Interstate I-81, which is called the Great Wagon Road. And they are coming in and out of the community, traveling throughout this region. And he realizes if he creates a little settlement or community here, people will spend money. So he creates the town of Salem in 1800. It becomes officially its first town in June of 1802 when James Simpson sells lot 17 and lot 18 to a woman by the name of Susanna Cole for the lump sum of $20. It's quite a profit, I would assume. Prices have changed since then. But anyone curious, if you're driving through Salem, lots 17 and 18 are right about where Charlotte's Web Antique Mall is today. So a little extra fun fact. But the Coles are a notable family in Salem because Susanna is a little bit of a local businesswoman, an entrepreneur. But most notably, her brother John is the town blacksmith. So anytime someone's wagon breaks or a horse needs shoed, he's the man to talk to. But most importantly for our story today, John Cole has a tract of land out in West Salem where he lives. And this tract of land is right here on the map in this yellowish region, covering along the Great Road with the back of the Roanoke River to it. His cabin is roughly right about here in the southern section of it. And his cabin's basically a small log building that sort of serves as an inn where people would travel up and down the Great Road, would stay in. This is before we had all the hotels on Wildwood, everybody. So you would be coming and you'd be staying in many individuals' houses if you were looking forward to coming into the community and had to stay overnight. And we have 2 famous people connected to John Cole. and actually connected with the property. And the first one came in 1797 when future King of France, Louis Philippe, was staying on visited the property when he was touring the United States when he was in political exile from France. According to Louis Philippe's journal that he chronicled his journeys with, he quotes, "We dined at the home of Mr. Coles, a Pennsylvania German. The countryside was unimpressive except here and there." He apparently wasn't very fond of tiny old Salem back then, especially since it was nothing like it would be today. But the second notable figure to come to the Preston Place happened the following year in 1798. And this is at the young age of 13, a young man by the name of Davy Crockett stayed in the coal cabin as he is traveling to his home in Tennessee from Northern Virginia. And even 20 years later, Davy Crockett accounts this by saying, "I continued with my kind protectors until we got to the house of a Mr. John Cole on Roanoke," in his autobiography in the early 1800s. But why I bring this up is because the Coles family is the precursor structure to the Preston Place. The Coles lived in, this house was built around, historians believe it was around 1789, maybe 1790, in this range. And the Coles lived there up until about 1820 when they picked up and moved west. But before John Cole left, he sold his tract of land to a man by the name of John Johnston. And John Johnston was a farmer by trade, and he noticed this huge tract of farmland so he could grow and make a living. So he sold the property to John Johnston, and instead of wanting to live in a rinky-dink cabin, he tears it down and builds what we would become known today as the Preston Place. What he constructs is a two-story brick farmhouse, and it is, as I said, will become what we know as the Preston Place today. But the house itself was pretty simple, and it was pretty unique for a time period that in Salem, there wasn't really a whole lot of architectural innovations going on outside of maybe one or two properties. But one of the really unique things about the Preston Place is the Coles actually recycled parts of the Johnstons, I apologize, recycled parts of the coal cabin to build the Preston Place. Most notably, you can tell that in the basement, where you can see these floor beams right here are part of the original coal cabin built in the late 1700s. Built in the late 1700s, and these are throughout the house, but the basement and in the west ground floor room are the most open examples of it. But with now, I'm going to take everyone back on a little field trip back to 2016, before the Salem Historical Society renovated the property. And if you were to walk into the Preston Place, you would walk into the parlor and you would come through this door and be approached with this image right here. This is the foyer of the Preston Place. And back in 1821, when this house was in early 1821, when the house was completed, this was the real main entrance into the property. Everything behind this wall back simply did not exist. So if you wanted to move throughout the house, you had to either go left, you could go right, or you could go upstairs. So we're going to go left into the parlor of the Preston Place. And this is facing east towards downtown Salem. I want you all to notice the difference in the fireplace right here, because it's unique for the Preston Place is just about every room has a different mantle on the fireplace, as opposed to sticking to one key theme with it. But I also want everyone to notice the couch right here and the chairs. Take a mental picture, everybody, because I'm going to talk about those a little bit later. But this is one side, this is the other side of the room. I think the wallpaper in here is absolutely incredible, but you can also see original door hinges on the wall, on the door as well. But arguably one of my most favorite things about this room comes on the two front windows right here, most specifically this one. Can anyone see this little scribbles right here? I have been trying for about 5 years to get this picture, and I finally got one today, so I'm a little proud of myself, everybody. But as according to family legend goes, this scribble says LOU 1879 right there. And this is when Charles Isaac Preston's daughter was just proposed to. And as the legend goes, the Prestons wanted to make sure that she had gotten a real diamond. So they decided to scratch it into the window to make sure the diamond could actually cut glass to make sure it was real. A unique little family story. But now we're going to go back to our field trip in 2016, everybody. We're going to go across the hall into the West Room. And you notice the fireplace is a little bit different from the one across the hall. And here's another one facing south back towards the extension part of the house where the foyer is. But what I also want you to get is, this is the ground level. The floors upstairs above it are very similar, and basically the entire layout is similar, and there's an attic above that property. So with that said, the Johnson family is using this property as a farmhouse. And John Johnson lives here up until his death in 1836, when it's passed on to his son, William Johnson. And it stays up until his family, it stays in his family all the way through the remainder of the Johnson descendants who would own it. But during John Johnson's tenure, though, he would install the first major renovation in addition to the Preston Place. He adds this little tiny room onto the back of it. And everyone is lucky that we're on Zoom today, because if you've ever had me give you a presentation, you know that I have a lot of Q&A session with my audience. So I'll spare everyone the guessing. This was the kitchen that was built on in the mid 1800s, probably about the early 1850s. Before this time, most 9 out of 10 house fires resulted from kitchen fires getting out of control. But about the middle of the 1800s, safety was improved and kitchens were allowed to be attached to the property. And here is a picture of that interior space, and it is continued to stay a kitchen up throughout 2014 and 2016. And here's one side, and here's the back side facing south towards the Roanoke River of the property. And this is probably my favorite room in the entire house. I just think the character in this room, with the exposed brick, the wood, exposed wood, and the exposed beams, is just absolutely tremendous throughout this property. But as I said, the Johnson family would live here. William Johnson would live in the house up until he passed away in the mid 1850s, when it was given to his wife and 8 children. But as many of us know, in the 1860s, the North and South had a bit of a disagreement, right? Resulting in the American Civil War. The Johnsons were still owning this property up throughout the American Civil War. And we haven't found the houses, but we do believe there were slaves on the property at one point. It's hard to really pinpoint with the resources, the references and the notes we have now. But basically what I want people to get out of this is, after the Civil War, the house falls under disrepair. And the farm is slowly, quickly deteriorating, and it's not being used adequately. But around the 1870s, we have a local citizen and a notable local citizen realizing that there's an opportunity here. This man is Charles Isaac Preston. And as with roughly 95% of the male population in Salem in the 1870s, he is a Confederate war veteran. According to family, he served in the Virginia Cavalry, and according to family legend, he also served as a courier for Robert E. Lee. Unfortunately, I haven't quite nailed that one down yet, so check back with me in a little while, and we'll see if I can pencil that down as to being more than just a family legend. But he is also in the 1870s the town sheriff in Salem, making him an incredibly important individual in this time period. He is also, most importantly to our story, a farmer. And Charles Isaac Preston sees this vast tract of property in disrepair and decides he wants to purchase it and have it as his new farm. Starting in 1872, he buys a small tract of land from the Johnson descendants. Then he buys another tract of land in 1875, followed by a third tract in 1878. Then finally, in 1879, Charles Isaac Preston buys the house along with the land directly around it for the lump sum of $600. And this will soon become the Preston family ancestral home, and the one that many people attribute, the one family many people attribute in Salem with the house. But Charles Isaac Preston will live in the property up until his death in the 1890s, when it was passed to his wife, Molly Persinger Preston, who would live in the house all the way until 1922, before it would then be passed on between the descendants. But in 1949, though, we have the second major addition to go on to the Preston Place. And that is they basically added another room onto the back of it, and they added a whole second floor for the entire property along with another attic. And it just increased the space and increased the property on the house itself. But the last of the Preston descendants to move into their property is Dr. Esther Clark Brown, who moved in 1974. Many people remember Dr. Esther Clark Brown because she is the first female general practitioner in Salem. And she is also a staunch supporter of the Salem Museum and Historical Society and one of its earliest supporters. Realizing the historical significance of her ancestral home being what is believed to be the oldest standing house in Salem, she works tirelessly with the Salem Historical Society to put it on the local historic register in 1977, and then finally on the National Historic Register in 2005, protecting it for future generations to come. Dr. Brown was a true believer in the Salem Historical Society and preserving this house for future generations. So when after she passed away in 2011, it was given to the Salem Museum and Historical Society at her request by her descendants. And then this is when the Salem Museum and the Salem Historical Society gets to make a decision what to do. After many passionate board meetings, committee meetings, and just meetings in general, the Salem Historical Society has decided to undergo the process of accepting the gift, preserving the property, and transforming it into a business to allow the rest of Salem to come and interact with this old historic home. This took place in 2014, and I want everyone to remember that because that is 2014 is an important year for this property for me. But so construction and renovation and restoration begins around this time in 2014, 15, 16, and 17. And the Preston Historical Society and the Preston Place Committee undergo this massive renovation project to get this building back up to scale. Many people who are familiar with old buildings realize that if you let them sit and don't have any sort of life in them, they sort of deteriorate a lot faster, it seems. And the Preston Place needed a lot of work to get it up and moving so that we could open up with a new tenant in there. The Preston Place Committee and the Historical Society underwent massive renovation, including putting a brand new HVAC system and air conditioning system up in the attic of the property. They did some improvements to the foundation to make the properties more stable in the basement. They put improvements on to make bathrooms handicap accessible throughout the property. They redid walls, they tore out wallpaper, they cleaned the floors, they cleaned the walls. They did a tremendous amount to make sure this property is presentable for the public. But two instances that I'm going to talk about today happened in early 2017 when I had just started working at the Salem Museum and Historical Society. The first one took place in March. At the very beginning of March, let's say about 3 months after I had been hired full-time at the Salem Museum. One morning, I pick up the phone and answer and talk to a very agitated and upset and angry fire marshal. And as a young employee, not knowing exactly what to do, I put the phone on hold and said, "Fran, there's a call on line 1." And basically the root of the issue was since we had transformed this property from a residential to a commercial business, we were breaking fire code because a fire truck needed to pull into the property, then pull out the same way that it pulled in. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Preston Place's driveway, it's basically just one straight line. So there's no way for a big car or a truck to turn around easily. So after a quick brainstorming session, everyone determined that there was an opportunity here as opposed to just simply tearing out the back of the Preston Place to allow a truck to turn around. So what they decided is I'll show a parent in the next two slides from now, but right here at the very base of the picture, you see this little patch of grass? I'll give you a hint, it's not there anymore. Because right here, they decided to put a little gravel lot so that a fire truck could pull in, back out to right there, and then pull out of the driveway going in the same way. So that's how the Preston Place helped us get up to fire code. But the second thing that we had to do, which I'll mention, took place in the rear of the property. To get this building up to code, we understood that we needed to make it handicap accessible for everyone. So we needed to install a handicap ramp onto the property. Easy, everyone, we can realize that. Let's work through it. Let's do it. The issue was one day when we're about to be in construction, we receive a halt order saying we can't do anything because this property is on a National Historic easement, meaning that we need to hire archaeologists to dig the footer holes for where the handicap ramp is going to go. So once we tracked down some archaeologists, it took, from what I remember, it took a little bit of brain power and thinking of where to find them. We got them from Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest. If I remember correctly, they were the resident archaeologists there. They came down for a couple of days to excavate and look at these footer holes and throughout the property. And they found really a lot of cool, unique things. This is, I believe, the base of a feature, or some sort of feature in the ground. I'm history, I'm not archaeology. So Whitney, if you know what this is, I'll let you chime in and tell me. But they found a lot of really unique things throughout this property. They found old bottles, they found trash, they found, not trash, they found shards of pottery, they found other unique things that frankly date back to the 1800s. But my favorite thing, and if everyone was here in person, I'd pass it around so we could have show and tell time, but we're not, is this guy right here. For anyone who can see, this is a penny from the year 1800, found just a couple inches below the ground behind the Preston Place. This penny is older than the town of Salem, to put that in perspective, and it's one of my favorite artifacts we have at the Salem Museum. And it's just amazing for me to think about what's simply resting a few inches below our feet anytime we walk outside. But that is my quick sales pitch for archaeology, everyone. Thank you, archaeologists, because without them, we would have never been able to find anything like this. But this was at the end of end of March. And then we spend basically the month of April finishing the bells and whistles and getting the house up to scale, up to work. Where on May 1st, 2017, the Salem Historical Society unveils the newest tenant, the White Oak Tea Tavern, and the Preston Place open to the community. And it's the White Oak Tea Tavern stayed for many years, but as many people know, unfortunately closed down in 2020 because of the pandemic. But we scoured and searched for a new tenant, and our new tenant, and I will let Meredith talk here in a little bit, is Glow Healing Arts. And we are working to get them open as soon as possible. And I will let Meredith talk more about her business model, or what her business here is here in a couple minutes. But at this point in the presentation, I usually get a lot of questions. Basically, everyone will say, okay, Alex, this is really cool. You all have saved this property. It is preserved, and you all are ready to move on from it, right? You focus on other things. And to that, I say yes and no. Because yes, we have preserved the Preston Place. It's not going anywhere. We are continuing to improve and renovate the property as things are needed to arrive. But now it is time for the Historical Society to interpret and tell the stories and preserve the stories of the people who are living in the house, who once lived in the house, and interpret those stories and share their experiences. And the first one I'm going to talk about is through the collection of letters and papers we know as the Preston Papers. And this is where I get my personal connection to the Preston Place, because once the house was donated to the Salem Historical Society in 2014, along came with it a very large collection of letters, and known as the Preston Papers. And also in the summer of 2014, there is a certain wide-eyed junior from Roanoke College who asked the Salem Museum for an internship. So my internship was to sit in the dank, dark basement of the Salem Museum and Historical Society for 6 hours a day, 2 days a week, looking at letters from the 1800s. To most people, to most interns with sanity, this would probably scare them off a little bit, but obviously I'm still here. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But as I'm working through this collection, two things stick out to me. First and most importantly is this collection is incredibly dusty, it's dirty, and it's frankly been nibbled on by insects a little bit. And asking the previous museum director, John Long, why this was, he said it was because it was stored, openly stored in the Preston Place attic. And as I've said, there's only one, as when I mentioned earlier, the original rooms of the Preston Place, there's one room that I didn't touch on, because this is the attic, everybody. It's dusty, it's old, and if anyone is curious, having fragile paper artifacts in a dark, hot, dusty attic is less than ideal way to preserve them. So as I'm working through them on my first couple of days, I was curious about the longevity of these artifacts. But thankfully, these papers are resilient. They made it 150 years up in the attic. That attic, they are doing A-OK upstairs in the AC of the Logan Library where they're stored right now. So if you're interested in looking at the collection, it is upstairs at the Salem Museum right now. But the second thing that really stuck out to me was something that was a little bit more pressing than the overall longevity of these papers. That's because, as many people know, people didn't write in print in the 1800s. Everything was in cursive. And in 2014, I had not used the cursive since 2002. To say my cursive skills were a little rusty is an understatement. I remember on my first day, I picked something up with my gloved hands, unfold it, and soon realized I can't read a single thing on this paper. Because cursive today is significantly different than cursive back then, because antique cursive is a lot smaller and a lot more compact than what I remember learning in second grade. So my first couple weeks at the Salem Museum during my internship, to say was spent on Google trying to translate old letters and old cursive was an understatement. But over the course of the next 2 weeks, my skills sharpened to where I was able to really interpret and see and realize and read understand what I was reading. So my major goal with these papers was to organize and begin the catalog process. Figuring the best thing to do was just get them out of the box and put them into original piles. You can see that's exactly what I did. And some of the things in this collection included old land deeds. There was old court documents from when Charles Isaac Preston was the town sheriff. There were old letters and personal correspondence. There were investment opportunities, most notably a naval compass that up until this point was unknown to have existed. This company was unknown to have existed in Salem. There was timetables from the Norfolk Western Railroad. There was advertisements for different plays throughout Salem. There was various other just sort of journals and ledgers. There were wallets, but arguably the most one of my favorites were these two antique fish hooks. But arguably the most important and significant pieces in this collection are these two piles right here. I spent most of my time seated in this chair, so most recognizably the largest ones are the piles right beside me. In this collection to the front is a collection of receipts of things that Charles Isaac Preston had purchased in the second half of the 20th century. And this is incredibly important because this gives us a snapshot of what everyday was like in one of Salem's most transformational periods in their history. And it's likely a collection like these receipts collection will never be found again in the Roanoke Valley. It's that significant. But I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the pile right beside it. It's because this pile is a pile of debt collection letters of things that Charles Isaac Preston didn't pay for or purchased on credit. It appears today Charles Isaac liked to purchase things on credit and forget to pay for them. So I'll just leave that at that. But arguably my favorite and the most significant piece of the collection to me, I uncovered on my very first day at the internship in June of 2014. Throughout that day, I had worked for about 5 hours, understanding little to no cursive of these letters. I was growing increasingly frustrated at myself for not comprehending things. So I decided to take a break and move into the second box that was over here on the other side of the table. As I'm floating through it, I pick up a letter and I notice this one's a little bit different because it's sealed. Every other thing that I had encountered throughout this collection had been opened and I'd just been able to open it. But this one was different. So I flip it over, I look on it, it's to Charles Preston's wife, Molly Persinger Preston. And I notice off in the corner there's a date by the stamp on March 1865. And for those of you who know me personally, you all will know I am a huge Civil War buff. I have been to over 70 different battlefields, historic locations, houses, museums, whatever. I'm so in-depth and unique and nerdy about this, I have a power ranking on all of the different locations I've been to. So to say that once I picked this up and realized this document is from the 18th Civil War period at the end of the war, I was like, this is really, really, really cool. So I carefully opened the letter. I carefully opened the document, take it out, and realize what I'm holding is the letter. As I'm opening it, though, I open it and something falls onto the table. Trying to decipher what's in my hands, I realize I'm not getting anything out of this. And I said it. I remember it is right here pictured. I said it right here and turned my attention to whatever is fallen out from it onto the table, thinking it might be a bug or something. But once I pick it up, I notice it's a water paper and I unfold it. And to say my jaw hits the ground and the table is an understatement, because in my hand is a $500 Confederate banknote. To say I was surprised is an understatement. I think my jaw was on the ground for the remainder of the day. And I wish I could tell everyone I remembered what that letter said, because when I looked back into it later in this semester and reread it, that part of my memory is just completely gone, and I apologize. But what I choose to believe that letter signifies is through context clues. In March of 1865, no one wants to admit it, but the writing is on the wall for the Confederacy. The war is in its final month for the Army of Northern Virginia, and many communities throughout the South are soon going to be sent into shambles. What I choose to get out of this is Charles Isaac Preston, who's off in the Eastern Front, fighting in this war, is trying to do absolutely everything in his power to support his family back in Salem. So he rounds up any sum of money he can find, sends it back home to support his family. Ultimately, it came a little after the war. The war ended and became useless. But after I finished with my internship in August of 2014, 2 different teams of interns came and further cataloged and organized and sorted this and put it into about 8 to 10 different archival boxes upstairs in the Logan Library. And it appears that the various different hands that have worked on this have further divided my different piles and caused this letter and Confederate bill note to be separated from each other. And up until this point, when I started working, I quickly set out to search for this letter and Confederate bill. And unfortunately, I wish I could show everyone a picture of it, but it has eluded my search up to this point. But I will find that letter eventually, I promise you. And it will be hidden away just like it was once in 2014 for another intern to find. But the Preston papers are a tremendously important thing for me. But understanding that this is just one story that the Preston Place can tell us. The next one we'll have is the collection of the Preston Place artifacts. And a lot of these things have a unique stories with them as well. The first one I'll talk about is this collection of tools, because as I said, the Preston Place was a farmhouse. They needed to do everything in-house to build and maintain the farm. So we have a 200 plus collection of old tools from the property. Upon really examining the house and examining its connections to the local community, we realized we have a shotgun in our collection that belongs to Charles Isaac Preston's in-laws, the Persingers. And it was a unique way to really connect the collection with connect the story of the Preston Place with different things throughout the museum collection. Next one I will talk about is this sewing machine right here. This is a Wilcox Gibbs sewing machine. And I will put a link into the chat button after I'm done talking, because the Wilcox Gibbs Sewing Company has an absolutely fascinating company history during the Civil War that I don't have time to talk about today, but I did a White Glove Wednesday video about it, and I will link to that if anyone wants to learn more about it. The next one and arguably probably my second favorite piece in the collection are these guys right here. These wedding slippers are about 6 to 7 inches long by about an inch and a half thick. So they are for someone with a very, very, very narrow foot. The unique things are, these are the wedding slippers that Charles Isaac Preston's wife, Molly Persinger Preston wore on their wedding day, October 27th, 1857. It's just amazing because we found these wedding slippers tucked away in manila envelopes sealed in a plastic bag, and it's just amazing how some things can just be hidden in ordinary objects. But arguably the one with the most unique story are these two chairs. And remember, everyone, at the very beginning of the presentation, I told you to take a mental image of that couch and that chair. These are the other two pieces to that set. And these chairs have quite the family history associated with them. According to family history, they were built in 1855 in Norfolk, Virginia, where they were part of the Persinger family, and they stayed there all the way at the very beginning of the Civil War in 1860. When many people don't realize this, when Norfolk was actually occupied by the Union Army for a vast majority of the American Civil War. And all of these Southern citizens were terrified that these Yankees were going to come destroy all their stuff. So the Persingers put these chairs with the couch, the rest of their valuables, onto a boat, took it out into the Chesapeake Bay, anchored it, so that those Yankees couldn't come destroy their property. It's just amazing that they've survived this long. But according to family legend, they brought them back to the house, and eventually they made their way all the way to Salem, Virginia, where they lived in the east room or the parlor of the Preston Place. And according to family legend, they survive today because Dr. Brown refused to let her children sit on the good furniture. So these are all just a couple pieces of the Salem Museum's Preston Place collection. And we have a vast collection of other things, including mourning clothes, other documents, other dolls, pieces of collection as well, that frankly, we don't have time to everybody to talk about. So we're going to move on. But once we've preserved the artifacts and we know the stories, the way we go about telling them to everybody is through exhibits and other ways. And the first one I'll talk about is this one right here. And this is our exhibit, At Home Along the Great Road, which was our featured exhibit in February 2017. And this exhibit focused on the Preston Place and another old property in Salem known as Old Castle. And this was an opportunity for us to share the rich history of these two properties and share some of the artifacts and stories that are associated with them. But the second way that I'll talk about this, and this isn't a shameless plug to get everyone to come into our gift shop, I promise you, is every year the Salem Museum does a landmark series Christmas ornament. As Fran said, this year's is going to be the Salem Fair. But in 2017, the ornament was the Preston Place, since it was such a monumental year for that property. And each ornament includes a little cutout bio of history on the property so that as you're going through it and you open it, you can learn a little bit about the house itself or the location as well. But the newest way we've interpreted the history is recently installed this summer. We have a historic sign outside in front of the house where this one's facing Main Street, so you can look at the sign and then look over your shoulder to get this exact view of the house. And it tells the history of the home along with many of the architectural history and important significant features throughout the property. But with that said, I guarantee you all have gotten tired of listening to me speak at this point. So I'm going to take this moment to encourage everyone, if you want to learn more about the Preston Place, please come visit me at the Salem Museum. I will love to talk you through part of the collection and just share some of the history with everybody, share extra history with everybody. So that said, I will hand it over to our next speaker.
Well, thank you, Alex. That was terrific as always. I really appreciate it. And we do have good news. We do have a new tenant, and it is Meredith Novak, and I believe she's on. And okay, good. I almost lost my screen there. But she is with Glow Healing Arts, and with Dr. Esther Brown being a healer, it's really nice to have that kind of a use back in that building, back in that home, that we will be having healing activities once more. So Alex, thank you.